people think, oh, consistency, I have to write every day, I have to make music every day. And what happens is like you just lose the passion because you become a machine. My first memories that I have of really falling in love with music were going to pick up a puppy. I must have been really young. I don't know, maybe 4, 5. I'm not sure, but I remember being in my mom and dad's car, and we were driving out to the desert to pick up this puppy. It was going to be our new puppy, and the whole drive, we were listening to a greatest hits compilation of the Beatles.
Right.
And a greatest hits compilation. No, it wasn't greatest hits. It was Thriller, Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Oh, there you go.
The album.
Mm-hmm.
And so my first memories of really falling in love with music, I remember that day. That's kind of like, I remember listening to Strawberry Fields and looking out the window of the car and like looking at the desert and hearing that song. And there's a song off Thriller called "The Girl Is Mine," with Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney, kind of like a duet. And I remember that song playing. But beyond that, I started playing piano, taking piano lessons when I was pretty young. And then I picked up guitar. And then in 4th grade, I had to pick an instrument for school, and I chose the violin. So I played violin in an orchestra from 4th grade to 12th grade, senior year of high school. And then I also, somewhere along the way, picked up drums, was playing drums. Oh, and then I started playing bass in a jazz band.
You're all over the place, yeah.
Yeah, I was just like trying to really I was so interested in music that I wanted to like I'd sit in the orchestra and be playing songs, and just like instead of just focusing on my part, I remember always listening to all the parts and like how they made up the entirety of the song.
Right.
And so then I started like composing, because I was in an a cappella group in high school that we did like some competitions and stuff.
Right.
Sorry, I know I just jumped all over the place, but I literally had very little spare time growing up, because I was like doing so many musical extracurriculars, like the jazz band and the a cappella group, and then the orchestra, and I had my own bands like with friends playing rock music. So it was cool to have like all the sides of the spectrum, like the classical side, the jazz side, the choir vocal side, and then and then obviously the rock side, which was like my main love. And if you have that in you, it's hard to deny it. It's like it becomes your everything. It consumes you,
and it blooms.
Yeah, for sure, it blooms. So kind of naturally, I guess we started singing together. I was always kind of resilient toward it, resistant rather, because you know, it's my little brothers, and I didn't. When you're in high school or whatever, it's kind of like, oh, I don't want to do like
you don't want to hang out with
siblings.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then eventually I was like, oh, this is like a really cool opportunity that I have, that we can like make stuff together.
Right.
Instead of always having to like, I had so many bands in high school where I was like having to get somebody in the band, and then they wouldn't practice, and I'd be like, oh, now I have to find somebody else, or somebody would move away, and it was just like so hard to keep a band together.
Right.
And then eventually I was like, oh, I have the answer in front of me.
At home.
My brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's kind of how it happened.
Right, that's cool. I mean, it's actually pretty rare that like in the same house, like everyone has sort of like the same set of skills, or like in the same area. Because I feel like pretty often with siblings, you know, you tend to be like the sort of the reaction to what they are.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still, well, the three of us are, we're best friends, so it makes it, I think because of how we were raised, we always stayed close.
Right.
And we had more of a relationship even now where if we see something we think's cool, we'll share it with each other. And then odds are that they'll probably think it's cool too, just because we're like-minded.
Of course.
And I think maybe that I could see how, I mean, there's still, obviously things that we disagree on, and that we're our own people, so we have, our own things that we like that the other person doesn't really like whatever hobbies or whatever. But for the most part, we're really we're really similar, I'd say. Like my brother Mark is like by far more right-brained than my brother Michael and I. Like Mark went to college for business and like was always the person to do like, statistics and stuff like that. And
right.
Michael and I are like, no. We went to Michael and I went to art school, and Mark went to business school, but we all three of us still understand, music and art in a similar fashion. It's just like we have subtle differences.
Would you say like that you sort of experienced a sense of isolation or alienation during that time in, I guess, your teenage years when you were sort of like the artistic dreamer?
Absolutely. And I'll even one up that claim and say that I feel that every day still. I think that, I don't know, if you can find me a genuine artist who doesn't experience overwhelming feelings of isolation continually, I'll be surprised. It's a rough thing to be in a relationship with. Art is a rough thing to be in a relationship with, because if you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to make things continually that are true to your emotions, then you're going to be in touch with those feelings of isolation and loneliness and confusion and existential, questioning. And because at the end of the day, even if you're happy with somebody else, like, you can still feel lonely as a creature in this world. I mean, there's too many things to ponder. And if you're one of those people who allows yourself to go down that path and to think about that stuff, which I do, a lot of the times I wish I could turn it off more, because it becomes overwhelming, and it makes me depressed. But I think it's important to face, because when you come out of that stuff, there's always like a newfound sense of purpose. And I think that if there's anything to strive for in life, it's to have purpose.
But like, so you definitely experience those feelings, and of course they have like that heaviness to them. But did you get that sense of like maybe pride or like self-importance out of it, or was it always sort of like the heaviness of it?
I think it's manifested itself into a sense of pride as an adult. But growing up, if you're asking about like back then, I think it was probably more of a point of angst and insecurity. Being in a family who's like sports driven and kind of not, I mean, it's funny because now my family's like super music driven, but we weren't like that until my brothers and I started being in a band seriously. But yeah, I always felt like the ugly duckling, like I felt like I didn't fit in, and so it was hard to find pride in that. It was more feeling vulnerable and insecure. But I think over time, I've learned how to take pride in that. And, you know, as an adult now, I definitely take pride in the fact of, you know, of what things I like. I always do the things that I like and dress the way that I like, and I don't really care about how other people feel, or I try my best not to ever let what else anybody else that thinks affect me. I think that's part of, like, also, like, I was very inspired by punk rock culture growing up. Like, I loved, like, Black Flag and Adolescence and Misfits and like early Blink-182 and early Green Day. Like, a lot of, like, stuff while I was growing up that was embedded into, like, punk rock and skate culture, which is funny because now a lot of that is, like, rap. It's weird how that changes.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. A lot of skate culture now is, like, kids listen to rap music, and I guess it's, like, got a similar spirit of rebellion, but it just, I don't know, it's hard for me to relate to because I think the lyrical content is different. Yeah. I was more, like, into the punk rock, you know, sort of fuck you mentality as a kid. So yeah, I guess there's a certain point of pride in that.
Was the school a time where you're like, ugh, or was it more like, meh, or, you know, what kind of role did you have in school, being the person that you were, like, you know, starting to be?
Yeah, school was tough for me. I mean, I just didn't I always felt like I didn't fit in my school. I was always, like, the outcast. Again, like, I went to a private school, and it was a lot of, like, sports people. And then I was kind of, like, the kid in the bands and, like, you know, like, weird guy. So, I mean...
And no friends, no little group to, like, sort of save you a little bit?
Yeah, I had a little group. We had, like, the weirdo kids that we hung out with and, like, would make music on the weekends and, you know, watch anime and, like, be loser kids together. But, like, I have pride in that for sure. Like, I like the things that I like, and I know I like them for a reason. And, you know, I think school as a social environment is really a hard place for kids. But I think one thing that I do love about school is I love learning. I think I love learning about new things. I love learning how things work. I love like reading books, and I love reading, like, philosophy and learning about different ways the world can be perceived. Like, I never want to stop learning. I always want to be learning, either, you know, if I'm in school or out of school. I had this one teacher in particular who inspired me. And he was really tough on me. He gave me hard grades, but he was so cool to me because he was a fan of The Cure, and after class, I would talk to him about albums and, like, different music. He played guitar, and I just thought he was, like, a cool teacher. And he started, like, telling me about, different artists who were really inspired by literature. He was an English teacher. And so he one of the books that he taught my class was Albert Camus' The Stranger. You know, The Cure's first, I want to say it was one of their first bigger singles was called Killing an Arab, and it was based off of that book. And so, like, he would talk to me about stuff like that, and then that sort of, like, inspired me to get more into literature, because I was like, oh, these bands are inspired by literature. Maybe there's something to this. And then I just got really into like reading and you know, authors, like particularly Aldous Huxley is like one of my biggest inspirations to this day. But yeah, so it wasn't like I was always like that, into learning in a big way, but I definitely felt a flip switch like around 10th grade or so, where it just became important to me to like get smarter and know stuff about the world. Who wants to go around the world just being an airhead? There's so many airheads. It's so much like more fulfilling to have context about culture and what's happening around you.
Yeah, I mean, you for sure build like a stronger drive, or like things are more of a real thing because there's a value to them, or there's like a there's like an entire world behind them. So I guess like your grasp to the world and to like existence is just more intense and more meaningful, of course. But then with this teacher that you mentioned, you said that he you know, he would give you like a hard time and he was a little bit tough. Would you say that you thrive more on like pressure or like praise?
Oh man, that's tough. I think, you know, it's actually a good. His name is Mr. Evans, and he's actually a good example of someone who I think did both for me, because he was tough on me, but then there were times where he would tell me when I really excelled in something. Like, it's weird because there was one paper that I wrote that he gave me a C, and I remember thinking like, how the hell did he give me a C on this? Like, I thought I wrote it really well. And then the next project I did, he gave me an A+, and then showed it to the class as the example of what everyone else should have been. So it was kind of like this interesting contrast where he was tough on me, but then also acknowledged when I did something really well. So I think that's maybe what a good teacher does, is they don't, you know, they're able to have the balance, not just praise, but also critique.
Which is what you would think, like, you know, a balance between those two. But I feel like I find that, or at least I've encountered people who are like very on like one of those sides. Like they're either like they feel like terrible and like they really can't stand rejection, or you know, and some people who just are always like sort of beating themselves down, and like that's the way sort of they scale in life, I guess.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean,
but no, it's good that you have like a more balanced way, because then he was being tough of you, on you, sorry, but the times that he sort of acknowledged something that you did very well, I guess those times would be even more meaningful, because you know, there was like hard work and stuff in there.
Exactly. That goes back to what we were talking about with having context. It's like the more you know, the more you can do well. There's this quote that I like that says, I never lose, I only win or I learn. And I think that that's a really good way to go through life, just thinking of everything as a learning experience or a win. There's no point in like dwelling on something as a loss and getting down on yourself. It's cyclical, it's toxic. The best way to deal with something, and honestly, I'm not the best at this. Like I struggle a lot of times. I get down on myself for certain things, but you know, it's a good way to aspire to be, is just think of everything as a learning experience or a win. You never lose.
Right. And I wonder, do you have that same approach with, say, your greatest influences? Like, because I know that when you guys started making music, you always keep in mind your favorite artists. William Blake, William Wordsworth, Aldous Huxley, you already mentioned him. Like, do you approach your influences or, let's say, your heroes in the same way, like in a positive way? Or do their, like, greatness ever, like, makes you feel paralyzed?
You know, the most important thing to me is just to impact someone else, hopefully, through what I've written. And all the rest of it is just fluke, you know?
Yeah.
It's not all the stuff that people are obsessed with, like legacy and fame and fortune and like Instagram and followers and like all that shit is just, it's so hollow and vapid. There's no meaning in any of it. It just leads to more dissatisfaction. I think people who get used to that end up addicted to it.
Yeah.
It's intoxicating, you know? Like, I've seen too many people go through that sort of addiction. It's really an addiction. And I think that's part of the reason, you know, Instagram's apparently doing this thing where they're taking away likes, like the numbers and stuff. I haven't been able to see any numbers on Instagram for months. And it's been weird. But I can see how it would be helpful for people, because then they're not worried about how many numbers things get all the time. The only reason why any of that matters at all is just to get a basis for, it's become almost an indicator of like some sort of business numerical digit, like how many likes does this get, meaning like how much influence does it have. Like in that sense, I understand from a business perspective why it matters, but in terms of like gratifying someone in terms of their self-worth or their sexiness or whatever the hell, like people post photos to feel hot, like man, that's so lame.
Going back to sort of, you know, the heaviness of stuff sometimes, and you mentioned that being committed to art and to like an authentic way of being and creating, how that would make you depressed and stuff. Would you say that there was ever a time where you thought of like quitting music or art, or like feeling like you needed to take a break from it?
Oh yeah, I mean I do all the time. I never think about quitting, but I take breaks all the time. I have to, and it's not only for mental health reasons do I take breaks, but also I think that the best work is made when you're inspired. I don't like to write when I'm not inspired. I think that I end up most of the time just making something that feels uninspired. And so I don't want to put that out into the world. I'd rather put out things that feel inspired all the time. I'd rather put out less things that feel I'd rather put out less quantity of art that feels inspired than more art and only some of it feels inspired. Because I think there's a lot of people, especially the way the music industry works now, or even just every industry, like poetry or like people think, oh, consistency. I have to write every day. I have to make music every day. I have to put a new song out every week or whatever. And what happens is like you just lose the passion because you become a machine, and you're not. Like, there's so many, I can't tell you how many, I mean, you probably know because your husband's in a band, but, like, there's so many songwriters who think, I have to write a song every day. I have to write and I feel sorry for those people because a lot of the times, they lose track of the original point of writing a song, which is supposed to be this feeling of inspiration, and you want to get a point across. Like, that's, to me, when somebody should be making art, is, like, they have something to say. And a lot of the stuff that we hear now is like people making music not because they have something to say, but more because they want to make music and they want to put something out. So they're just like, they're making something for you know, whatever, they don't really have a reason, but then they try and figure out what the reason is while they're making it. And that's like, I guess that's okay, but I prefer not to do it that way, because I just think it ends up feeling like not as true to myself. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I've had this debate with my brother like so many times. He's trying to tell me to like focus on like reach quotas, which I guess sometimes is necessary, especially if you're like working on a big project. I guess some like structure is necessary for you to actually like get stuff done. But like I definitely relate to what you're saying in the sense of, if you're only focusing on reaching the quota, you're just going to like rush yourself through everything, and it's going to be like fluff.
Absolutely. And sometimes people do come across, it's like a diamond in the rough. You know, sometimes you will find something that's special because you're digging and digging and digging and digging. And I'm not trying to invalidate that form of writing or creation, but I'm just, for me personally, I prefer the other way of like taking a break, living life a little bit so that I can feel again, feel, you know, like feel something that inspires me, and then follow the inspiration.
Right. I feel like sometimes when you create, you have to reach out a little bit to see what's in there, especially if you're not sure of your own like feelings or ideas, or you know. And sometimes it's all there and like everything's so like crystal clear, and that's when I guess is the most enjoyable for sure. But I mean, balance. I don't know.
No, I agree. Balance. Like I still do the other way as well. There's times where I'll have a session, like I have a writing session tomorrow. I'm not going in with a specific inspiration, but you know, there are some times where we do it that way, and I find something in the process.
Right.
You're right. It is balance, but I still stand by the other way. I think is my favorite way. It feels the most real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like the times when it's not like that, it's sort of an excruciating process. And this reminds me of this interview with David Bowie I found the other day.
I think I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, I shared it the other day on the Instagram of the Doppelgänger Show, and
you did?
Yeah, where he was like explaining why making music or art in general was not exactly like pleasant to him, and it was more like this thing that he had to like suffer through in
100%.
order to like.
I can't relate to that more.
Yeah.
Like it's sometimes it's like pulling teeth. It's never been. I mean, I could say, I guess. Sometimes it's cathartic to make art, but most of the time, I'd say it's even a bit painful.
Yeah.
And that kind of sounds weird, but I don't know, that's kind of how I feel. And I think that's why, going back to one of your original questions, it's a difficult thing to be creating and staying in that positive mind frame. It takes its toll, and you just kind of have to take breaks.
Yeah.
And inspire yourself again.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm also not the best person to be talking about how to do this right, because I've barely released music over the past like 5 years or whatever. So I have to. That's a whole nother scenario. That gets into the whole like politics of music business and like independent releases, and like we were on a major record label, and then the label got dissolved, and the subsidiary label that we were on, and so I mean, now we kind of just want to like release music in a way that we have a good platform to launch, you know, have like marketing, the proper whatever push behind it,
right?
Because it's tough. There's like so much music being released in this era because of DSPs and how easy it is to put stuff online, that it's really easy to just get caught in all of the other art that's out there. So you got to find a way to separate yourself. So I'm still trying to figure that out, how we're going to do that. but I think it's looking like we might just put out stuff indie this next release.
Nice. I don't know if you can tell me much about it, but I don't know if you can. I'd like to hear that. Release? Yeah.
Well, it's hard to say because like so many things keep changing. Like we did an interview with Flaunt last year, and I think we said that we were going to put out an album, and then that kind of got derailed. Just like, there's so many different pathways you can take, and we're at a point now where we kind of just like, we're fed up with being strung around by different avenues of thinking, okay, we'll do it this way, and then something falls through, or like something ends up not being what we wanted, so we pull out of that situation. We just like been through a lot of weird, I don't know what that would be, like a political situation.
Right.
I don't know. It's starting to feel like there's been a lot of other situations where we're with certain people, certain management, or certain, other people like reps that we're talking with that we're maybe going to work with, and then we end up spending time working on something with them, and then it kind of falls through because we're not happy with the situation. There's just been a lot of like stuff like that. We're kind of settling a little bit on maybe just doing it our way for this next release and doing it indie, because it's difficult finding the right partner for something, like especially in a music world that's so heavily dominated by hip hop and rap right now. It's like rock is it's such a small section on the music business right now. That it's just kind of
it's also like very specifically oriented. Usually people are like aiming to be like these very specific thing, because I think also like artists now are more self-conscious about their image, since so much has really, like, a lot of the weight of your success is on your shoulders. Since social media and stuff is like, of course you work with people, especially in the music industry, but I feel like there's also a big responsibility on you, and like you putting yourself out there and like self-promotion, etc.
Right. No, yeah, it's weird. You have to wear a lot of hats as an indie artist, and as a smaller artist like us, where we don't have like a big team to help us with stuff. We got to do a lot of the stuff on our own, and it's a lot to manage.
Right.
It's hard. So people, there's a lot of people that make social media their whole career. Like they just manage social media, and like that's a perfectly respectable job, but it takes your whole day. So it's hard. It's hard to do all of it at the same time. It takes a lot of organization, and and then like just kind of a underlying, almost like a manifesto of like between my brothers and I, like who are we, and we know who we are, and like let's make sure that we can stay true to who we are without like losing touch with social media, because I think it's easy to just like fall off and just like focus on music and making art. But it's so important now. Tech is changing everything.
So you write as well?
Yes. I'm hoping to publish my own poetry book soon. I'd really like to do that, because I have so much poetry that I haven't shared online.
Right.
So that would be cool. That's a goal of mine.
So right now you're like in a curating process, like going through the stuff that you've accumulated through the years? Yeah,
I've been pulling together a bunch of poems that I think would fit together in the first book, and then I'll probably end up self-publishing that as well. I think as indie as we can stay for as long as possible, the better.
That's awesome.
Actually I took a bookmaking class in college, so I kind of know a little bit about book bindings and like how to do it myself. for a hot minute, I was thinking about just making it myself, and then I was like, oh no, it's way too much work.
Right. Well, that's the class that I was missing. I'm telling you.
Yeah, exactly.
Damn. No, but that's awesome. I mean, looking forward to see what you come up with.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely be vocal about it when it's ready. And I think regardless of how we do it, we want to put at least 3 songs out in the next few months.
Nice.
So maybe we'll do it one by one, or we have a bunch of different ideas. We got to really solidify that. But we have songs that are really they've just kind of been sitting. We just have to have the right avenue. So that is the struggle.